So let's dial this into California. Can you explain to me, and for the listeners too, who is PG&E? What is PG&E? Where did they come from? And then we can jump right into the Campfire in 2018. What happened and what was the actual human cost of that?
Yeah. So PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, is the utility company serving almost all of Northern and Central California. It has service territory covering 70,000 square miles. Of course, well-known power provider to San Francisco and San Jose, but also lesser known areas of the rural Sierra foothills, right, in Central Valley. And the company, it's more than 100 years old, came to be with the sort of race to develop hydroelectric power in the early 1900s. Pacific Gas and Electric Company formed in 1905 after there was a company that it was still a time in which power companies were competitive, right? So there was a bunch of little power companies competing to serve different areas, and a couple of pretty smart entrepreneurial guys created a company that bought up all of these competitors, not all of them. Had one competitor for a period of time called Great Western Power, the only real competitor PG&E ever had. Built quite a bit of transmission infrastructure high up in the Sierra Nevada, and then the two companies merged in 1930, creating the great Northern California monopoly that we know today. Around that time, it became sort of conventional wisdom that utilities should be monopolies, given the right to operate exclusively in any given service territory in exchange for submitting to regulatory oversight. So that's sort of the history there. And it worked well for a period of time, but then a good lens through which to view how things can go wrong is the 2018 Campfire, which ignited when a hook on a century-old transmission tower in the Sierra foothills failed. It broke. It was a hook about the width of a fist. It broke nearly in half and dropped a live wire that swung against the metal tower. Sparks settled in the dry brush below, and within hours, a massive wildfire was blazing completely out of control. It destroyed the town of Paradise and several nearby towns and killed 84 people. And that hook that broke was original infrastructure from something like 1915-ish, purchased for 50 cents. And it had been built by Great Western, that one competitor that PG&E had back in the day. And, with that acquisition, obviously, records and stuff got lost and purged. And it's like when it came time to investigate the disaster, PG&E had very little records on the origin of the infrastructure, for one, and also had very poor records as to what they had done to inspect and maintain the line over time. And it was determined that over time, the company had done too much to reduce the frequency and thoroughness of its inspections up there. I mean, this is very remote infrastructure that's hard to access, but it was really becoming prone to failure, and they should have been doing more.
I was going to say, did they have any other close calls prior to the Campfire? I mean, something made in 1910. I can't think of a single item in my daily life that I use that even approximates something that old for a reason.
Yeah, so if we're talking just about transmission, which is, sort of specifically the issue of the Campfire, right? The age of this high voltage network developed to, carry hydropower way, way back in the day. When PG&E did a thorough inspection of that system in that region after the Campfire, it was determined that there was many, many other hazards that could pose similar risk. So it so happened that it was this disaster that revealed other problems on the transmission system. But there's another major risk category that PG&E grapples with, and that's the prospect of trees hitting lower voltage distribution wires, so wires that are closer to, towns and cities and, that directly serve your house. And in 2017, there was a massive windstorm. These sorts of winds happen every fall in California, both the south and the north. In the north, they're called the Diablo winds. So the Diablo winds start to blow in October of 2017, and roughly 17 or 18 wildfires ignite as a result of branches touching PG&E's power lines. And that underscored the fact that the company needed to do much more to keep vegetation away from the wires. It hadn't been doing so effectively until that point. And so it's an unfortunate fact that like in this industry and others, it often takes a disaster to make the company aware of how short its efforts have fallen as it relates to risk management. But this is something that PG&E is still grappling with. As far as I'm aware, they've done more to make the transmission system safer, but this issue of distribution wires and trees is still very active.
That's actually an issue. I live in northwestern Montana.
Mm-hmm.
The timber here in areas is very dense. And actually, if I go outside from the building I'm in, you can see these very high power transmission lines. They cut the break in the forest as it travels through the hills and it goes in different directions. But we get windstorms here from time to time. And, you know, come August, September, October, there's been times where I can't even see a block down the street because of the smoke. And I would imagine it's very similar to, and for people not familiar, the Campfire was up north of Sacramento, I would say in the foothills, actually up in the foothills. There's a lot of timber, very, very similar to where I am. It's an interesting issue. In the newer construction here, they've started burying power lines, which at least seems to insulate from the trees falling over, but the vast majority of the infrastructure in place is not new where I live. So I don't know how they plan on tackling that.
Yeah, and you make a great point with this this idea of putting wires underground, because so it's interesting. In Europe, actually, after World War II, there had to be a pretty massive rebuild of parts of the grid, right? And companies were smart to say, let's put this underground. I think at the time, of course, it was like, well, maybe it can't be taken out as easily next time, right? It wasn't necessarily so much a fire issue, but we never really had the opportunity in the US for that kind of like large scale rebuild. And so for that reason, in most parts of the US, distribution lines still run overhead. In some places, companies have selectively put it underground, but to kind of retrofit the system in that way is really expensive. And PG&E, so I'll just say in 2021, PG&E got a new CEO after these massive fires. The company ultimately went through a bankruptcy restructuring process. And she comes in with the intent of making things safe, right? This is sort of like going to be her legacy career move. And 6 months into her tenure, a little tree falls on a distribution line not too far from where the Campfire ignited. And ultimately, the second largest wildfire in California history spread throughout the foothills, covered more than 1 million acres.